This is to all my black folks. We gotta we gotta get it under control, y'all. We gotta get right. Because I mean there are people out there that genuinely believe, and I understand the innate belief and the hope and the want to believe in these figures like Kamala Harris, like Barack Obama, like Jim Clyburn, people that ostensibly feel like they're fighting for us because they look like us and they know the words, right? They know how to vibe with us. They look like us and we want that representation. That's all great and fine. But see, we need to dig a little deeper and look a little closer and understand that you need to be representing us with policies, not just words and rhetoric, but with policies that are actually going to improve our material lives and the material lives of the communities in which we live, right? So let's go back to, a time when, I was 13. So I really wasn't paying attention to this, but over the years I've learned that, this is what happened. It was hope and change. It was Obama. And I remember watching his inauguration and feeling so hopeful and that symbolic, the gravity of the symbolism that Obama was at that time. It was hope and change, and a lot of us felt that. And see, whenever I try and bring up and talk, to black folks about the Obama years and the Obama era, I inevitably comes to, he just couldn't get everything he wanted done because, that's how Congress works. And you can really tell that they've been beaten down by that mainstream thought and ideology that you can't really get anything done as a president. You have to have the Congress. You have to have all these other things. There's so much obstruction. Republicans, all good and fine. Those, some of those arguments are, actually accurate. But let's take a look at this, because Obama had something that Biden doesn't necessarily have now, but he has something close to it. But he actually had a filibuster-proof majority, meaning that they could literally do whatever they wanted as a Democratic caucus. There's nothing that the Republicans could have done to stop it. You see, McConnell uses every single tool in his tool shed to actually stop anything from going through when there's a Democrat in power. But during these periods of time, it was about 5 months total, the Democrats had a completely filibuster-proof majority, meaning they could get whatever they wanted done. And you can see on this screen, from July 7th, 2009 until August 25th, 2009, from September 25th, 2009 to February 4th, 2010, and for one day in September 2009. So about 5 months total, they had a filibuster-proof majority. And how much did Obama, who we know was a great politician, great orator, right? I mean, just came out of nowhere, beat the Clinton machine, and really, I mean, he overwhelmingly won 2 straight elections. Like, that's how great of an orator he was. And so we know that if he truly wanted to get something better than the ACA through, he could have used his leverage over, this more conservative Democrat. This sound a little bit familiar. He could have used his leverage over someone like Joe Lieberman to say, oh, I'm the president and I overwhelmingly won. So I'm going to come to your district and tell you and tell your constituents that you are upholding this public option, which would be at the time, obviously we need universal health care, Medicare for all, but public option at the time is what was being pitched. And did we get that public option? No. We got an individual mandate system with no cost controls, skyrocketing premiums, forced you to buy health insurance from a private company. Now their stocks soar. And we wonder why that happens. And then you see on the back end that someone like Obama took massive amounts of money from Wall Street CEOs, from big pharma, and from the health insurance industry. And as a result of his legislation, which marginally did help some people, marginally. And I don't want to discount those people because their lives were improved, and that's great, and I'm happy for them. but it still left millions and millions and millions of people out, while the health insurance industry stocks skyrocketed, CEO bonuses, all that stuff skyrocketed, right? And so we need to be more careful about who we just choose to support because, based on their appearance, because you have to understand that the Democratic Party weaponizes identity politics. They will put someone like Neera Tanden in front of you and say, this is going to be the first South Asian OMB director. If you're a South Asian, you want to support her because she looks like you, she represents you. When in fact, what she actually does is she goes into those places of power and she legislates against programs that disproportionately help people of color, people that look like her, right? So it's not just about what they look like. Right? I would have loved to support someone like Kamala Harris in the primary if she had a platform that was actually going to be benefiting black folks, folks of color, disproportionately benefit them, like legislation like Medicare for All, like legislation like free public college, right? Infrastructure that, where's the infrastructure failing the most in communities of color? We covered that the other day. With they're trying to move that plant to the south side of Chicago, and and things like Flint, right? Infrastructure just fails. Things like Jackson, Mississippi still doesn't have clean water for 10, and that might be 11 days now. They don't get FEMA. They don't get what Texas got, Medicare, emergency Medicare. They didn't. Jackson, Mississippi didn't get that, right? So we know these things disproportionately affect communities of color. And we need to not just have representation of people that look like us, but actually that experience the world as we experience it, and therefore will legislate in a way that benefits us, right? And so another thing, like the minimum wage, right? Kamala Harris now has power, and she was put in front of a lot of black folks saying, look, now you have even more representation, the first black VP. She's going to be looking out for you. She's going to be legislating for you, helping you out. Now she has the ability and the power, the real power, to overrule a unelected official, staffer, essentially Senate staffer that no one even heard of before this month. Overrule that person and say, we're going to put minimum wage in this bill. Why? Well, let's look at this. Let's look at this stat. Workers of color are far more likely to be paid poverty level wages than white workers, right? So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about disproportionately these legislations that are universal, but disproportionately help, communities of color. Why? Because, well, let's look at this stat. Today, 1 in 9 workers are paid wages that would leave them in poverty for their family size if they're the sole earner in the family, even with a full-time year-round schedule. That's why no matter what color you are, this minimum wage is not a living wage. $7.25. I mean, it's just unimaginable that is still our minimum wage. You're talking about doubling the earnings of people overnight. Doubling the earnings. Well, I guess it will be over 45 years, but it should be much faster than that. But you're talking about doubling their earnings. I mean, it's unbelievable that is even being talked about, considering it should be closer to $24 an hour. Let's keep reading. In 2017, 8.6% of white workers were paid poverty wages, i.e. hourly wages that would leave them below the federal poverty guideline for their family size if they are the sole earner in the family, even if they work full-time year-round. In contrast, 19.2%, nearly 1 in 5 Hispanic workers were paid poverty wages, and 14.3%, roughly 1 in 7 black workers were paid poverty wages. Asian or Pacific Islander workers who also had higher poverty wages rates than white workers at 10.9%. So this is what we mean when we say this is a black issue, the minimum wage. It's a person of color issue, full stop. Why? Because people of color are at much higher rates earning these wages. So if you put in legislation that changes that dynamic, who are you going to help disproportionately? You're going to help black people and people of color. Kamala Harris, this is the representation we need from you in Congress. Yet you are abdicating your duty as a duly elected representative to actually put that legislation, use your power to help put that legislation into place. Now, here's someone I believe this is black people, I think we tend, and Brianna Joy Gray was talking about this. I think she put it beautifully. I'll try and find the clip. But disproportionately, we seem to believe people in power that look like us more so than other races. Now, why is that? I'm sure there's a lot of dynamic behind that we won't really dive into right now. But that is the case. People like Jim Clyburn, people like Kamala Harris, like Barack Obama, Al Sharpton, all these people. So here's someone that I think we should be listening to instead. Why? Because he's actually fighting and seeing past the facade of the two-party system, seeing past the facade of, the lesser of two evils, and actually saying, no, you're in power right now, and we need you to legislate for us and to help us. Let's take a look at what the Reverend William Barber has to say about this issue.
When they get in office, too scared to run on what they said they were going to do, worried more about some kind of false notion of compromise. Don't you remember the 3/5 compromise kept us in trouble for 250 years, and we still haven't gotten over it. And the social life of America, my God, it's past time for a move to Capernaum. It's time for a change. When I see D.C. senators who are multimillionaires, who we pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a piece and give health care to them free, and they just because they got elected, and who swear to establish justice and promote the general welfare. And when I see them stand on the floor of a Senate and say poor and low-wage people don't need a raise, essential workers don't need it, and if they do need it, they only need a small one, in light of the fact of more than 140 million people, poor and low wealth, even before this pandemic, in light of the fact that we had 8 to 11 million people who were homeless before this pandemic, we had 14 million people who couldn't afford water before this pandemic, we've had 8 million people since March, between March and November, who fell below the poverty line in this pandemic. We had 20 million people collecting unemployment in January of this year in the midst of the pandemic. And when I see them hide behind rules like a filibuster that was first used after the Civil War to block changes to move this country further forward, and has been used by the likes of Strom Thurmond and has been used to block women's rights and labor rights, or I see them hiding behind a reconciliation rule and a parliamentarian rule that are not even in the Constitution. Not one of them swore to uphold a parliamentarian's rule. Not one of them swore. The president didn't swear to do it. The senators didn't swear to do it. And even when I see the president, I love him preach his inaugural sermon from this very pulpit. But when I see him say he's going to listen to the parliamentarian rather than listen to the people, the poor people, the low-wage people who have kept this country alive, who have been the first to have to go to work, and the first to get affected, and the first to get sick, and the first to go to the hospital, and the first to die. And when I see the vice president, yes, she's my sister, but I know she can overrule the parliamentarian, and she can force the senators to vote.
And see, that's exactly right. That's the energy we need right there. That's the energy we need. And that's someone we need to be paying attention to. Why? Because he has his finger on the pulse, and he's also now the new leader of the Poor People's Campaign, which is, what Martin Luther King was, pursuing. That was his next project before he was assassinated. That's who we need to be listening to. He has his finger on the pulse. Why? Because he sees and interacts with these people every single day. He's not in an elite bubble. He interacts with these people every day, and he understands how much something like this would help our community. And I wanna play another clip from Brianna Joy Gray, because she specifically talks more about Jim Clyburn, who, everyone kind of admitted he was a huge reason why Joe Biden was able to win the presidency, because he delivered South Carolina. There was a stat that said 50% of South Carolina, I think it might have been black voters or voters overall, said that Jim Clyburn's endorsement held weight for them. It was a significant factor in deciding on who they were going to vote for in the primary, whether it would be Bernie or Biden. He came out and endorsed Biden. Later on, I guess we can play the video from Clyburn touting George Bush, saying that he saved the republic. George Bush of all people. This is what Clyburn had to say on that.
George Bush said to me today, he said, you're the savior. Because if you had not nominated Joe Biden, we would not be having this transfer of power today. He said to me, Joe Biden was the only one who could have defeated the incumbent president.
Okay, so that kind of sets the stage for this. Now let's play a clip from Briahna Joy Gray. She's talking about Clyburn and how a figure like Clyburn it's kind of pervasive to be able to criticize him, because he is this civil rights icon and he is this black leader, kind of similar to John Lewis, like MLK family. So we tend to believe them and listen to them, kind of full stop. But let's hear what she has to say about what she believes we need to be doing more of as far as holding these politicians accountable, black politicians in particular.
That's not the case. We just had an election cycle where all of the Medicare for All supporting Democrats won, and all of the blue dogs had a huge struggle bus, and we lost seats in the House.
Right.
We have the polling. It's clear. This isn't 1996. It's 2021. And so your colleagues are either stupid, which I don't think is the case, or they are just like with a parliamentarian. Jesus, this word. Parliamentarian. They're grasping for excuses to not do the thing that their constituents obviously want. Yeah. And so at what point are you and other progressives in Congress going to start calling them out and pointing to what's really motivating them? When are you or anybody else in Congress going to point to the fact that Jim Clyburn, the man who was kind of universally understood to have handed the election to Joe Biden by calling him back from 3 losses in a row in the first 3 primaries, enabling him to win South Carolina? 50% of South Carolina voters said that Jim Clyburn's endorsement was material for them. Wow. When is someone going to point out that he has taken more money from the pharmaceutical industry than anybody else in Congress? Not in the House, in Congress.
Wow. Yeah.
The whole shebang.
Okay, so why is that important, right? Why is everything she just said so spot on, and why is it important that we look at issues and legislation and policies that they're actually supporting, as opposed to just taking them at their word? Let's take a look at South Carolina in particular. So let's take a look at this. As of 2014, nearly 4.8 million individuals lived in South Carolina. South Carolinians accounted for 4% of the total 118 million individuals living in the 17 states, including DC, that make up the American South. People of color make up over 1/3 of South Carolinians. Okay. And let's see. Okay, let's go to this next stat, which I think is, it's a huge reason why Clyburn is one of those figures that, we need to move away from listening to them full stop, because he endorsed Biden, right? He also, like Briahna was saying, takes the most money from the health insurance industry in Congress, the most money. Those are legal bribes. A corporation is not just going to give you money out, from the bottom of their heart, right? They're going to expect something in return. And how did their donations, the bribes, pay off to Jim Clyburn? Well, 50% of South Carolinians, his endorsement was a huge factor. And let's look at the healthcare numbers for the black population in South Carolina, the people that look to Jim Clyburn as this, figurehead who, they can just listen to and will have their best interest in heart. Let's see. Health coverage in South Carolina. South Carolinians are more likely to be uninsured compared to the nationwide population. Consistent with the uninsured rate for the southern region, 15% of non-elderly South Carolinians are uninsured, which is higher than the 12% uninsured rate for the non-elderly population nationwide. Uninsured rates are higher for non-elderly adults in South Carolina compared to children, 18% versus 7%. Consistent with adults in the southern region, non-elderly adults in South Carolina have a higher uninsured rate compared to the overall rate for the United States, 18% to 14%. So you see, I mean, let's look at this too, because this is important, because that legislation that Obama got through, the ACA, right? What does that do in practice to people in places like South Carolina? So Medicaid and CHIP, which is the Child Health Insurance Program, eligibility levels in South Carolina are low compared to the national median. South Carolina's Medicaid CHIP eligibility limit for children is 213% the federal poverty line, compared to the national median of 255%. And its limit for pregnant women is 199% the federal poverty line, compared to the national median limit of 205%. Because the state has not adopted the ACA Medicaid expansion to adults, eligibility for parents remain at just 67% the federal poverty line, or about $13,500 for a family of 3. And other adults without dependent children remain ineligible regardless of their income. So basically, there's a lot of people that are left out of, one of the bigger parts of Obamacare, the ACA, that was supposed to help these communities, right? And so when you don't have a universal program, when you have this piecemeal program that it really is a Republican right-wing, program, is a legislation that was thought of in the Heritage Foundation, which is a right-wing think tank. So when you actually look beyond the surface, guys, there's a lot of reasons to question these leaders and this leadership, and it all comes down to the policy, right? So when we're talking about minimum wage, that is a black issue. When we're talking about healthcare, universal healthcare, that is a black issue. When we're talking about infrastructure programs and deals, that is a black issue. Why? Because this system disproportionately affects people of color, particularly black people. It disproportionately affects them. So when you actually put programs in place that will remedy this, it will also, on the other end, disproportionately affect those communities too. Pay attention to the policies. We need to get away from just listening to black leaders because they're in a position of power and they're black. Okay, we need to look at the legislations and policies they are supporting. And I know it's tough. I know it's difficult because we want to believe in people that look like us. We're happy to see representation. We're happy to see having a black president. I understand that. I really do. I really do. But we need to move past that. Why? Because administration after administration, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. Black people and people of color, these communities are left behind. Okay? We need to move past that. And I'm hoping that a video like this, where I'm sympathizing with y'all. I understand. I get it. But we need to we need to come together on this, okay? We need to get right on this because it's important, and things will not change unless, we embark on this journey. We need to do it. And so this is my plea to y'all. Stop listening to people just in position of power just because they're black, right? Look past the facade. Actually see what legislations they're supporting, how they're using that power, whether they're overruling, a parliamentarian, stuff like that. Okay. It's important. And I think it really is the next step for us if we actually want to see any real change in our communities.